So my question is for Karishma to begin with. How is AI reshaping your business, and what trends are you closely monitoring for product innovation?
Thanks, Rika. Didn't completely forgot that the first question was directed at me. So with healthcare, it's been an exciting time. I think there's just been so much that has changed in the industry. And I think for the first time, at least that I've been a part of the sector, I feel like the technology, the laws, more importantly, and patients and doctors are where we need them to be, I think, to really have transformational change. I think tech in healthcare, people have been talking about it for decades, I feel. But usually you can't do that in isolation because especially with a very trust-driven sector, which I think is what healthcare is, it's very, very hard to change things unless there's just a whole blend of things coming together. And I think that's what's happening right now. I think in terms of areas where I see the most dense stuff that I'm personally very excited about, as boring and unsexy as it's going to sound, the provider and the clinical workflow automation and AI-based changes we're going to see, I think that's what I'm very excited about. We started doing some of that at HealthTab, but I think that's where I see doctors giving us the best feedback, to be honest. It's, like I said, very, very boring things like how do we make it easier for them to diagnose patients? How do they look for like multiple chronic conditions amongst these patients? How do they do prior authorizations for prescriptions better? So it's very, very administrative, like high administrative, very involved tasks that doctors or nurses don't particularly enjoy, which they've been doing for a really long time. And what they really want to be doing is putting the care back in healthcare. And I think that's what I am personally very excited about. Although I know it's not necessarily the most sexiest part of healthcare, but that's what I'm excited about.
No, that's great, Karishma, right? I think the not so sexy is the new sexy, right? Like AI is becoming that sexy factor for all of us. And yeah, I would love to tap on Balaji here on some of his thoughts. As you heard from me, like this group is like different industries and different verticals that we have worked on. So I would love to learn from you, Balaji. Like, what's your take here?
Sure thing, Rika. And thanks for having me here. Very excited to share some of my thoughts. Speaking of what is sexy, what is not sexy, AI, in the cybersecurity space is as old as the hills. I mean, I was speaking to someone earlier. We've been doing AI for like last 15 years. And whether that AI is what is AI today, that's debatable. But it's very interesting how fast this industry has changed in the last 3 years. I'm giving a very short window. So AI, in cybersecurity, you're always fighting an asymmetrical battle. You're faced with hundreds of determined attackers, could even be nation states, coming after your data. And you are a single understaffed, overworked admin trying to defend with the tools at your disposal. So AI always has that attraction. Okay, maybe my work will get easier. Maybe I can, fight back better. How can I tailor or coordinate my responses when I see an attack? And that threshold is being constantly innovated. So now we are seeing technologies, especially multimodal AI, that can basically look at various dimensions of data, logs, network traffic, user behaviors, context, and then stitch together a response. So that is very interesting and game-changing and substantially increases the bar for an advanced attacker. The second super interesting area is legacy AI systems. When I say legacy, it is not more than 5 years old. Always had this problem of false positives, which means they can come up with false detections. And that's because they were trained on limited data. It is very hard to find unique, interesting threat data that you can train on. But now what has changed with generative AI, we are able to even create that test data. In the company I work in currently, we create our own test data, we train our models. And so our models are seeing everything. What does a phishing email written by an English native speaker look like? What does it look like when it is non-native? Contextual. How are executives attacked? The whole shebang. Everything is now fed to an AI. AI generates that. We train our own models. We get better. So this is a new frontier, right? The other interesting development I've seen, and this rapidly raises the bar of security, is what is called as a digital twin. Has anybody heard of digital twinning? You guys know that? So it has implications in privacy. So you can't use user data to train AI models because who knows what else it's going to learn on. So you use AI to essentially create synthetic data, and you train on that, and you train your privacy models on that. It's highly accurate, well, remarkably accurate, I would say. So these are very interesting trends. So one industry that is radically reinnovating itself to be relevant using AI, I would say, is cybersecurity. It's a very exciting space right now.
Thank you, Balaji. I would love to go a little further into this, right? So I would love to start with Michael. Can you share a real-world example of AI significantly enhancing customer experience or solving a pain point?
Yeah, I can relate to the security side, right? Being identity security, there's always this kind of battle of security and user experience, right? We make it very difficult, challenging, so that security by kind of just complexity. But that means that your experience is not great. And I think the really interesting thing is, if I'm kind of follow up, dovetail to that question of the trend is how is the current, let's say, this growth of Gen AI kind of experience, not necessarily the technology itself, but you look at how you're getting the information, right? We're all used to now, hey, let's go to ChatGPT or go to Claude, type of prompt, we expect something coming back. And from a security kind of vantage point, you're always asked for more data, right? You want to see more, you want to see a lot of information. And what we've seen with Auxiliary as well is that now there's so much data, they get convoluted and they go, I don't know where to go. And they look at the whole dashboard and they go, okay, it's fancy looking, but how do I make sense of it? And so I think a use case that we've seen is, right, like pretty simple. If you go to Excel, you want to filter data to a pivot table, you click a bunch of things, right? And you set the parameters, then you run it, and then boom, you get the view you want. Today, you can use something like the interface of like a ChatGPT where you ask, hey, can you show me, devices that's running on this version of, let's say, OS system with this vulnerabilities, and then boom, here comes a list for you. That kind of navigation experience change is a value driver from a customer vantage point, because now instead of having to look up how do I find the information, or I have to call support, or hey, talk to your customer success manager, you actually have some sort of this, right, co-pilot assistant that can help you get to the information sooner. And that's something I've seen even at my previous company, where this sort of experience kind of augmentation of how you get to information is getting very interesting.
Thank you. Karishma, I know you are very passionate about AI in healthcare, so I would really love to kind of hear some examples from you.
Yeah, so I guess if I was to pick an example, so HealthTap, we work a lot with senior citizens a lot. So the Medicare, traditional Medicare, Medicare Advantage population, right? And really, once you start working with that population, what you realize, of course, I think we all know in theory it's an older population, likely more prone to having chronic conditions, things like that. I think what's very deeply underappreciated is how bad they are with technology, actually. So it literally starts with us being on the phone with these patients, being like, well, I don't have an email. Like, that's honestly the role we're playing sometimes, like when we're talking to these patients on the phone, right? So you start with a place of, I don't have an email, to you're trying to convince them about how to do a non-urgent virtual care visit with a primary healthcare provider, right? And now coming to the context of these patients have a lot of chronic conditions, I think what we didn't realize initially is these patients are not like us. They're not comfortable typing, I have 10 conditions, I'm taking 20 medications. They don't even know what dosage of the medications they're taking, right? And so I think because we learned from this population really, really quickly, we actually implemented a beta test. I know we were talking about beta tests a bit earlier, where we, developed with our clinical team an algorithm that does more of the voice to text, type of deployment, where we can actually just prompt the patient on the phone to give us a lot of that information verbally, which we can then transcribe and provide in a contextual way for the doctor. The other piece of this, I will say, is information collection, intake collection, medical history collection, which is very complex for these senior patients. The other side of that is now you have a lot of information, and how do you actually present that? How do you present what's relevant to the doctor? Because what you'll hear from doctors now is that there's a lot of data. There's a lot of data. There's data coming from your devices. There's data that's being entered by the patient. There's data that's coming in from hospital records. There's a lot, right? And so how do you know what is most relevant for that patient at that point in time? And how do you build that kind of relevancy, right? So there's also that other side, which we've also been deploying and testing. And again, I love some of the stuff I heard earlier around iterating, testing, because that's a very big part of this. We in no means claim to say we are 100% accurate. We are not. We are complementing what a primary care doctor is doing, and we are here to assist them. We're here to provide some clinical decision support to them, but we are not replacing what they do. And I don't think we ever will either. To be honest, primary care providers, we call them the quarterbacks of the healthcare system, very underpaid, though, unfortunately. So those are two very concrete examples, both on the intake as well as the clinical decision support making side.
I'll definitely tap on accuracy. So I am in fintech. It's a very regulatory environment. Something that comes to my mind is like things like when you want to file like claims and disputes, like a transaction and all of that, it's not like as easy to just put something behind the scene and say, okay, go make a decision, like how much money I'm refunding and all of that, right? So accuracy is a huge part of how you decide where to apply AI versus not. I think one of the examples that we are also trying to experiment is can we automate some of the operational processes to improve the claim processing, refunding the money back to the customer. Is that something we can do? Industry says, I think Financial Regulatory Board says 99% accuracy. So can you get to that, right? So there is a lot of those factors we continue to look at. So there is an accuracy from an AI, but then there is an accuracy even from governing bodies, the banks that you work for, the financial crimes that you work for, because you want to make sure there is no fraud. And you are able to drive trust and safety for the customers to come back to you. In the same series, I would like to double click further. We talked about general trends. From there, I know we are talking about specific use cases. Now, how do we measure the impact of some of this, right? So I would love to start with Prakash here. Prakash, tell us, what metrics do you use to measure the customer value derived from AI-driven features or products?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And in the previous session also, I think that question was asked. So I'll tackle this from a very broad lens. Like on the B2B side, it all boils down to either the two leverage points are either revenue or cost, right? So either you're influencing revenue in some shape or form, or you're influencing cost. And cost actually, on the B2C side, is common to that cost as well. Cost is not just dollar cost, but it's also saving of time, saving of energy, automating few steps. So those are the two major levers I would say that you have to, because whether you are a product manager or a startup founder trying to go for funding, that's where the rubber meets the road. You have to say, how does this benefit the customer? It has to influence either one of those two buckets. On the B2C side as well, you have to showcase that your product is going to deliver value by saving off 1 hour a day or 1 hour a week, or it's going to bring down this process from 10 steps down to only 2 steps. Or it could be very simple as this will do it more reliably for you rather than you having to do it manually, right? So I think that's where essentially, they're essentially the same metrics, but you really have to tie yourself to that basic metric that a leader would understand, or somebody who's going to fund you is going to understand. Because ultimately, that's all it boils down to. You have to follow the money, and even time can be translated to money, right? That's my big motto, is that if you're trying to look for a very specific metric, like ROI, that's a different matter, of course, right? As a BM, you're trying to say, I'm going to invest so much in NVIDIA chips. Well, that's a different use case. We're talking customer value. Customer value is always about, is it going to save me time? Is it going to save me some, headaches in terms of doing this? That's what it comes down to. It's like jobs to be done, is, the framework that we all use. Either it has to have a functional benefit to me, or it needs to have an emotional benefit to me. The emotional benefit is peace of mind, security. Someone is taking care of me. It's helping me be more accurate. Those are the basic things.
Definitely. No, thank you. Thank you, Prakash. Michael, tell us more from your experience around how do you measure it? The impact of some of the security examples that you were earlier highlighting with us.
Sure. Yeah. But I mean, if we break it down to the core, I think when you talk about measuring customer value, there's a baseline, more or less, right? Are you solving the pain point? Earlier on the fireside, I was talking about really understanding your customer, what and why they want your service, your product. So at the core, what you're measuring is, as mentioned, right? The delight coming from them. Are they feeling like I'm getting value out of the tool and the functionality? That could come from, right? NPS is one thing, but there are ways to look at, are they really, getting their problem solved? So that's one way to look at measuring. But then at the same time, I think you have to also look at the technology side of things, right? Is it efficient enough? From a business standpoint, right? There's the customer value going up should also drive your business value going up. And I think that connection also needs to be there. Then you're looking at, is the thing that I build, causing more money than what we're bringing? Is there a bottom line improvement to the business itself, right? If you look at product management as a function, yes, there's a lot of talk about A/B testing or validation, user research, and everything else. But at the end of the day, our job is to make sure that the company is making money, right? Especially if you're a startup, revenue is your line of keep going. And as a job as a PM is you got to make sure what you build, the resource, the time you're investing, is bringing that. And so measuring that as well is pretty key. So it's kind of, they're multifaceted, but if you look at customer value perspective, are you getting the delight coming out of using your product? So like the example I shared earlier around one thing we measure, right, is time to value. And time to value, not so much how quickly you get value out of the product, but how quick can you solve that problem you need, right? If you have to go through, let's say 10 clicks just to get to a table, like example I was showing, versus you type a prompt 10 seconds and you get the information. Now, accuracy is very important, but that shortcut into the insight means you can move faster. When you can move faster, that means you can do more in some ways, right? The more you can do, right, that kind of all compound effect add up. So that's the one way to look at the metric perspective.
Thank you for sharing that, Michael. Yeah, I think value to the customer, value to the business, depending on the company, stage, type of business. I think there are a lot of factors that we are talking about here. Switching the gear a little bit, we specifically talked about specific industries that we are experiencing currently. I would like to tap on cross-industry learnings. So imagine an AI use case that has been successful in one industry. How have you really tried leveraging those? Balaji, would love to start from you.
Thank you. So as it so happens, I have close experience on this topic. So one of the startups where I was a founding PM a few years ago, Blue Hexagon, the founding team, the CEO there, was part of the team that built Deep Blue, which defeated Gary Kasparov. Do you guys remember that? Right? And that was probably the first time people took computers seriously. You're beating this chess genius. And it is very interesting because what was the learnings there and what is different about that computer was it had figured out all the moves, a sequence of moves, which lead to victories, which lead to defeats. It had figured out patterns or clusters of moves, which when executed in sequence will lead to a stronger position. Something way beyond how a human thinks, because human trains on muscle memory and neural memory, and the AI does all the parts. So that concept was taken and we implemented. We built a solution. Of course, the company eventually was sold to Qualys, but we built a solution to essentially figure out what patterns of function calls, or I'm sorry, I'm going a bit technical here, what patterns of function calls, what patterns of code, when they appear together, constitute ransomware or constitute fraud or constitute phishing. And there are only so many ways of doing it. I mean, it is not entirely random. You have to call certain things in order. And so those learnings were adapted here. I'm not saying the same code was used, but those learnings were adapted, that insight. And then we ended up building what is called as the industry's fastest real-time sandbox. So within a matter of milliseconds, we could detect anything malicious, anything zero-day, anything first time that is seen in the internet, because that is the big problem cybersecurity has. The first arrow nobody can stop, right? So it is like you go to let's say you're buying bulletproof armor, and the guy tells you, hey, look, the first bullet, I think we can't stop, but after that we are very good. Does that help? You're dead, right? That's what most companies do today. They say that 99% accuracy, but I can't stop the first bullet. This technology actually tried to solve that, right? And we were quite successful. So it's very interesting. So AI is a domain that keeps on giving back. You have learnings across the board. Speaking about healthcare, a lot of the medical image detection, deep learning neural networks that essentially do the detection, diagnosis of cancer, diagnosis of advanced diseases. So same algorithms are now being used to detect patterns of network traffic, figure out what is good, what is bad. Similar algorithms. So this is something people are just scratching the surface. It's going to continue, the learnings that we're going to be seeing across the board.
Thank you, Balaji. Yeah, I think we are also trying network graph in fintech, so it's very interesting, like different lens. Prakash, tell us more about from your experience. Like, have you applied any learning successes that you have seen in other industries?
Yeah, I'll try to run through 3 quick examples, 2 from my own experience and 1 that may be relevant as well. The first example was I did consulting for a while, and for me, I knew that my ability to be placed in any particular role was based on all of my skills. Right? So skills are super important. The client needed these skills, and only then you could. So when I became a product manager, we had a skill model we had built as part of another use case. And then I realized that there is tremendous value in this skill model because it could power so many different use cases within the enterprise. Like, for example, my hypothesis at that time was companies are just laying off people and then hiring back people because they don't really have a good knowledge of what skills do they really have within the enterprise. Right? Once you join the company, it's as though your skills kind of disappear out of the window, or at least there's no kind of a global view into what skills you have. So strategic workforce planning, which is completely driven by skills, is a huge use case. There's also learning and development, right? So right now in the LLM world, we talk about vector search or similarity search. So in a skill model too, that's how they say that, okay, this person who knows C also knows C++ because they're adjacent skills. The similarity is close. So that's like an example of using one particular model, right, in different use cases across the enterprise. The second example is more recent with data AI. Before LLMs became very popular, they were still being used. The primary use case was translation. So a very practical example is at Data AI, we had all the reviews for all the apps posted anywhere on Google Play or on iOS, right? So that's like 1 million a day or probably more, and across all countries, not just one. So obviously the publisher of the app wanted to understand what the users were saying about their apps in a few languages. So we would use large language models to do the translation. That's the basic use case of large language models. The other vector as product manager you have to think about is that, well, okay, translation is one use case, but what else can I use the model for? So, well, they're very good at summarization, right? So you take 3,000 reviews rather than having one person or a couple of interns, which is what our customers told us, read through all the reviews and say, here are the reasons why this app is not doing so well or what could be improved. We have a large language model do the summarization and give us topics, right? These are the topics. Customer service is not good, opening is not good, onboarding is not good, gameplay is not good, whatever it is, right? So that's like another use case of how you can use kind of the large language model in terms of its capabilities in different use cases, different industries. Last quick example is about what I read in the news recently. I invest in the stock market because I feel like, okay, I've worked hard for my money, now my money has to work hard for me. Or actually the second way is for me, it keeps me in touch with the major trends, right? Again, follow the money. AI hype might be going on, but which are the stocks that are really doing well? So there's a company called SoundHound that has been blowing up over the last 2 days, mainly because they were primarily 90% of the revenues came in from the auto industry. More conversational LLM kind of a thing. Now they announced a big deal with a drive-through service, a taco service, retail industry, right? And the stock went up like 40%. So it's possible to diversify essentially by using a model that you've done very well in. You figured out the kinks in there. You do that. And if you think about it from a product manager perspective, which is the other area that has a lot of text, like I talked about reviews, right? Legal. All the lawyers with 100 volumes behind you, they can't go through all of them and figure out which case law is which next to which. You have to cite all of that case law. LLMs are perfect for you, right? So just think about it from a very broad perspective, and you'll find that there's a lot of interoperability between models and industries. It's all about solving the pain point.
No, definitely. I think from my personal experience, like I've worked in retail, I worked in food tech, like selling tacos and selling merchandise on Walmart and Amazon, and now like selling financial services. It's like one good example is like when customers reach out for help. I think customer service is a very prominent use case across industries. But then from my personal learnings, like I've built opportunities where, when a customer is reaching out to a human, how faster the human can actually mimic the issue that the customer is going through. So kind of mirroring that, like, in larger scale, like in different industry. I think taco was the most interesting one. Like, when the customers call and they'll be asking like, hey, can you refund my money? Because I did an online order for $10 taco. And our agents will be like, okay, it's a food, it's perishable, right? Like, okay, should I return, not return, right? So a lot of these things comes into play. So it has been a lot of fun learning like from one industry to other industry as well, personally for me too. I know we have another 20 minutes, so this is going to be our last question, and we would love to open it up for Q&A. And I would love each one on the panel to have your take here, right? I think it's more around future-proofing. What emerging AI trends are you most excited about, and why do you believe they can create an impact in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think definitely AI, seen different trends come and go, of course. So AI, I think just because it's very powerful technology, it can be used in different use cases, different industries. I feel the possibilities are huge. The biggest challenge, either as a startup founder or as a PM within, let's say, a B2B enterprise, is finding the right product market fit. Meaning, is this use case going to do better than, because every time new technology comes in, there's a tendency to kind of see if it applies to every single thing, and that's not always the case. So as I mentioned before, LLMs right now do great when it comes to summaries, right? Summaries that by themselves are huge in that sense. They can do labeling very well. So you just have to find the appropriate use case where all those capabilities and the decrease in hallucinations, right? So that's one thing. But in terms of future-proofing, my point is that there are already incumbents in the industry, the big tech, that have two major advantages. One is distribution, right? Because they have a billion plus users across the globe. And the second is resources. They have the resources to improve their foundational models and everything else. So if you are someone not in part of this big tech, then your primary two ways to future-proof your industry is to look for knowledge or data that is not generalized, meaning it's specialized, right? I gave you the example of Harvey or legal. So that's not information that can be scraped very easily. Healthcare is another industry which you cannot really scrape very easily to train your models. So you have some kind of moat there to some degree to build up some level of expertise. And it's also a small industry enough that the big players may not come in. So it'll give you enough runway to run with it, become better, and then you may get acquired or you may become successful on your own. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
No, I think 3 to 5 years, we could definitely, all the things that we think are far away from us could actually be a reality, right? It's something that really excites me, and I've been trying to keep up on this, is multimodal AI, essentially. So being able to not just process data of one type, but being able to stitch together and develop contextual understanding of what is being asked and how to deliver the value, I think we probably will see, turnkey improvements there and new applications and new products. Right? So this also means areas where human limitations exist today, but we don't have a choice. Best example I can think of is air traffic controller, one of the most strenuous jobs out there, and people need to be on that. They can't mess up. Lives are at stake, right? Or could be surgery, for example, some complex surgery, or depending on the surgeon. I would say these kinds of problems are ripe for being disrupted by AI, which can deliver that at a higher degree of precision, and do it repetitively over and over again, and thereby free up humans from being part of that sort of value chain. Right? So that is one big trend. The other area I think where we will see, or we should, I hope we see substantial improvement, is bias prevention, as well as more ethical implications of AI, because with all the data getting sucked up out of the internet, you're also bringing in all kinds of biases and all kinds of pollution, if you will, for lack of a better word, which can create untoward outcomes. So building those controls in place to ensure that if AI becomes that layer that sits between data and knowledge, if you think about it, and humans consume knowledge. So 15 years ago, Mala was saying Google was, 20 years ago? So basically, Google basically opened up data that is all over the internet to the masses. Now I think AI will replace search engines, or the search engines will become generative, and then the knowledge will be available on tap, right? Anybody remembers the Matrix movies, right? Where that guy wants to learn kung fu and he learns. Hey, that is probably there. Right? You want to prepare for a speech tomorrow, or you want to prepare for a technical discussion. AI is going to be your helper there, and it is going to deliver higher quality, higher caliber outputs than humans can. So I think a lot of interesting trends, but there are also safeguards that the technology needs to take care of so that this stays in our control. And I'm not touching on the adverse sides of it, right? I mean, automated drones for wars and all that. I mean, that's all there. I'm just talking about the positive aspects.
Thank you, Balaji. Karishma.
Yeah, I guess I'll just take the flip side of this, which is I think it's also important to know when to stop, right? So again, coming back to the healthcare example, and the reason I bring this up is because especially in the healthcare sector, there's been a lot of churn, a lot of very prominent shutdowns that have happened through this year, and a lot of it has happened because they've tried to bring in tech where perhaps they shouldn't have, or they've tried to bring in AI into aspects of healthcare where they shouldn't have. And again, as somebody who's in this space, I will say that that's something, we hear from our patients, right? There are things, like I said, which can really greatly improve the efficiency in terms of how a doctor, performs their function day to day, or a nurse performs their function. But we can't take that human aspect out of it. And I see this stuff come up all the time, right? Because there's a very strong case to be made for what if it was just all AI, like the AI asked and diagnosed and did this or did that, or wrote this prescription script or gave them this order and stuff like that. But I think what we fail to recognize in a lot of those cases is that there's a point at which patients don't want that. They want humans. There's a reason why primary care is a longitudinal relationship, and it's a relationship-based care model, right? So I will just take the flip side of this, which is to say it's also equally important to know when to stop and to know, yes, there's AI to this extent, but not beyond this just as yet, perhaps. So
No,
yeah.
that's a real fear, not just on a fun note. Very recently, my son was using ChatGPT to figure out, can it understand what his dad does? I'm like, what? So he entered my husband's name and he's like, okay, I'm asking ChatGPT, does it knows my dad? So that's a different kind of fear, right? That comes to the mind. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take a slightly different approach, and maybe more kind of an AI trend from a internal and kind of executional perspective, right? Yes, trend inside what's happening, what could be happening down the road. It's something to keep in mind. But at least for me recently, there's a lot more thinking around how do we use these tools to do our job better, right? There's, I saw Ravi Mehta's post about product management is dead, and I was at the Lenny's conference where Claire Vaux talked about that. We had a group conversation about that. But generally speaking, right, like there's ways of working being changed with technology. That is always the constant. We're always going to have something better, right? We went from, I still remember my little Nokia phone to now I have an iPhone, right? Totally different beast. Shorter battery life still there. It's a problem. But the thing about change is that the fact that there's these tools now that can help us as well as like our team, right? For those who are leadership positions, or those are practitioners here, even founders, right? This notion of one person founding company without having to hire more people because of agentic AI, for example, where you don't need to, right, deploy the same resource, still able to achieve the same outcome, right? That's very exciting, right? I think, but then if you bring that into, let's say, your organization, is how do you fast track that? So I think that is very exciting for me, because for my team, I'm like, how do you guys get better and faster? I kind of was thinking today after I read that post, I was like, yes, there's a notion of first mover advantage, right? I'm like, in my head now, it's more like fast mover advantage. Like, how fast can you move with accuracy and with the speed, right? The more that you can produce that actually is gaining ground on your competition, then you move faster toward these trends, right, that you're seeing. So I think that's quite exciting to see what are all the different tools that can come out that help us in our job, even at the leadership level, as well as your team, right, at the more practitioner level. So, yeah.
It was fantastic. Thank you, Michael. And I learned a lot from each one of you. So thank you for letting me be your moderator. And I hope you all were able to kind of learn some of our experiences, what we are doing. Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's time here.